Why more money never feels like enough. It's 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and a man is staring at a banking app on his phone, looking at a number he has chased for 3 years. It is the number he wrote on a napkin at a coffee shop, back when he had a fraction of it, the number that was supposed to mean something. He has finally reached it tonight, an hour ago, after a transfer cleared. He expected to feel something close to relief, maybe even triumph. He feels nothing. Worse than nothing. A faint specific disappointment, like arriving at a party that already ended. This is not a story about failure. This is a story about a man who succeeded, exactly on his own terms, and discovered that success was not where he left the feeling he was chasing. He does the only thing his mind knows how to do with discomfort. He picks a new number. Higher. Already the old one stops mattering. It happens in under a minute, and he doesn't even notice the switch. This will happen to almost everyone watching this video, at every number they will ever reach, unless something other than the number changes first. He is not unusual. He is not ungrateful, and he is not broken. He is simply the latest version of a pattern that is played out in nearly identical form for every person who ever believed a specific sum would be the line between anxiety and peace. The napkin changes. The coffee shop changes. The disappointment does not. What makes this particular night different is only that, for once, he noticed the switch happening instead of simply being carried by it. Most people live their entire financial lives inside this loop without ever catching it in the act. Noticing is not the same as solving it, but it is the only place solving it could ever begin. Marcus Aurelius observed in Meditations, Book 4, Paragraph 3, that the requirements of a contented life are remarkably few, and that nearly all of it comes down to the way a person chooses to think rather than what they manage to acquire. He did not write this as a poet. He wrote it as an emperor who had access to anything money could buy, and who watched himself want more anyway. There is something almost unfair about how quietly this happens. No alarm sounds. No moment marks the exact instant the relief fails to arrive. The mind simply moves on, already negotiating with the next number, leaving the disappointment behind so fast that most people never get the chance to actually examine it before it's gone. Tonight's question is not how much is enough. It's why your mind refuses to answer that question honestly, no matter what number you hand it. The moving number. Here is the part nobody tells you when you set a financial goal. The goal is a liar, and it lies by design. You picked a number because from where you were standing it looked like the edge of the problem. Get there, and the anxiety stops. Get there, and you finally exhale. But minds do not work in fixed targets. They work in relative distance. The moment you close the gap to a number, your nervous system recalibrates around the new position, and a new gap opens above it. Not because you're greedy, because that is what the measuring instrument does. Think about the version of you from 5 years ago. There was a number back then that felt like freedom. You may have already passed it. Are you free? If the answer is no, the problem was never the number. The problem is that you are using a tool, a constantly shifting comparison, to answer a question it was never built to answer. Seneca, in Letters to Lucilius, Letter 2, Paragraph 6, observed that no amount of wealth has ever brought an end to the longing for more, because the disease is not in the wealth. It's in the appetite measuring itself against itself. Notice that this is not a flaw unique to people who struggle financially. It shows up with equal force in people who have already won, by every external measure, more than once. Winning does not retire the mechanism. It only proves to the mechanism that it works, which makes the mechanism stronger the next time it activates. This is also why raises and windfalls so rarely deliver the relief people expect from them. The mechanism does not log the increase as evidence that the chase is over. It logs it as proof that chasing works and promptly resets itself one notch higher, ready to start the same calculation again from the new baseline. Here is the part that should unsettle you. If you reach your current number and the feeling does not change, you will not conclude the goal was wrong. You will conclude you simply need a bigger one. You have done this before. You will do it again. The number after this one is already forming in your mind right now quietly, even as you hear this sentence. It will arrive dressed as a reasonable revision, not as a relapse. It will feel responsible, prudent, even modest, compared to what you could theoretically aim for. That is exactly how the loop survives scrutiny. It never asks for an unreasonable amount. It only ever asks for slightly more than whatever you currently have. That is not ambition. That is a loop with no exit built into its own logic. And the exit, when it exists, was never going to be a number at all. The comparison engine. You did not invent your number. You inherited it. Somewhere along the way, your mind absorbed a figure, a salary, a net worth, a lifestyle, from someone you watched, envied, or measured yourself against, often without ever meeting them. That borrowed figure became the silent benchmark for your own enough. This is not a character flaw. It's a survival mechanism, repurposed badly. For most of human history, comparing resources to the people in your immediate tribe kept you alive. It told you whether you had what you needed relative to the group you depended on. Now the group is infinite. Social feeds, neighborhoods, industries, strangers curating their best financial moment for an audience of millions. Your comparison engine, built for a tribe of 40, is now running against the entire planet, 24 hours a day. Notice what happens the instant you learn someone earns more than you, owns more than you, looks more secure than you. Something in your chest recalibrates. Not because your actual life changed in that second, because the engine just got new data. This is the cruelest part of the mechanism. It does not need accurate data to recalibrate. A curated photo, a vague comment at a dinner table, an assumption about someone's house. All of it gets treated as fact by an engine that was never built to verify its inputs, only to react to them instantly. Most people assume the solution is simply to look away, to delete the apps to avoid the comparisons entirely. That helps less than expected, because the engine does not need a screen to run. It can generate a comparison from a single overheard sentence at a family dinner, or from nothing more than an assumption about a neighbor's car, and the engine never asks the one question that would actually disarm it. What is this comparison costing me right now, in this exact moment, that has nothing to do with the person I am comparing myself to? It simply fires, and waits for the next signal to fire again. Epictetus, in Discourses, Book 2, Chapter 18, warned that a person who allows their sense of worth to be set by something outside their own judgment will never rest, because that external standard can always be exceeded by someone else. Here is the trap closing. Even if you beat every person you currently compare yourself to, the engine does not stop. It simply searches for a new reference point, slightly higher, slightly further away, and resumes the same quiet ache. There is no version of winning this particular game that ends the game. Every tier of success simply introduces you to a new tier of people to measure yourself against. People who, from where you now stand, look exactly as far ahead as the previous group once did. You are not behind. You are running a comparison that was never designed to have a finish line against a field of competitors that has no edge. The phantom threshold. There is a number in your head right now. You believe somewhere below conscious thought that if you reach it, the discomfort ends. This belief feels so obvious that you've never examined it. Of course, more money would fix the unease. What else could it be? Here is the uncomfortable test. Picture the exact moment your bank balance crosses that threshold. Not vaguely, specifically. The notification. The number. Now ask, what precisely changes in that instant? Most people, pressed for a real answer, go quiet, because nothing changes in that instant except a digit. The fear that was running underneath your ambition doesn't know what a digit is. It only knows the felt sense of insufficiency, and that sense was never wired to the size of a bank account. This is why people who cross thresholds they spend a decade chasing report, almost universally, a strange flatness instead of relief. Not because they were ungrateful, because they finally collected the data point that the threshold itself never had the power they assigned to it. It is worth sitting with how strange this actually is. A person can spend 10 years organizing their entire life around a single figure, sacrificing time, relationships, and rest to reach it, and the moment of arrival can pass with less emotional weight than an ordinary Tuesday. That gap between the size of the effort and the size of the payoff is not an accident. It is the clearest evidence available that the target was never the actual destination. Some people respond to this flatness by assuming they simply chose the wrong number and immediately set a new, larger one, certain that this next threshold is the real one. It rarely is. The flatness tends to repeat itself with uncomfortable precision at every threshold, for anyone who has not yet questioned the premise underneath all of them. This is rarely diagnosed correctly in the moment. The flatness gets blamed on the number being too small, on bad timing, on circumstances that distracted from properly enjoying the win. Almost never does it get correctly attributed to the actual cause, which is that the threshold was never wired to produce the feeling in the first place. Marcus Aurelius observed in Meditations, Book 7, paragraph 29, that the only territory a person genuinely governs is their own mind, never the events outside it, and that recognizing precisely where that boundary falls is the place real strength begins. The number was never the threshold. It was a story you told yourself about the number, and the story is the only place the relief was ever going to come from. This is easy to accept in the abstract and almost impossible to believe about your own specific number, the one currently sitting in your mind right now. That exemption you feel, the quiet certainty that your case is different, is itself part of the pattern, not an exception to it. So here is what should worry you. If the relief was never in the number, what exactly have you been postponing your life to chase? The treadmill of acquisition. Remember the last thing you bought that you were certain would change how you felt. The car, the apartment, the watch you saved for 18 months to justify. Try to recall the exact texture of that excitement now. Most people can't. Not because the memory faded, because the feeling itself didn't survive contact with ownership for more than a few weeks. This isn't a coincidence, and it isn't about you specifically. It's a documented pattern. Humans adapt to almost any improvement in their material circumstances within roughly the same window, regardless of the size of the upgrade. The new becomes the baseline. The baseline becomes invisible. Invisible things don't generate feeling. Here's the part that should land hard. This means every future purchase you're currently anticipating, the bigger house, the better car, the next milestone, is scheduled by the mechanics of your own mind to disappear from your felt experience almost as fast as the last one did. You're not failing to enjoy your gains. You're running headfirst into a treadmill that was engineered by evolution to never let satisfaction sit still for long. Standing still feels like falling behind. So the mind keeps you moving, keeps you wanting, keeps the next acquisition glowing just ahead of you. The cost of this is rarely counted in money. It's counted in attention. Every hour spent anticipating the next acquisition is an hour withdrawn from noticing the life already sitting in front of you, the one that was supposed to feel like enough the moment you arrived at it the first time. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from running on this treadmill for years without naming it. It does not look like burnout from the outside. It looks like ambition, like drive, like someone who simply wants a great deal out of life. From the inside, it can feel like never once being allowed to stop and actually arrive anywhere. People on this treadmill often describe a strange sensation of speed without movement, of working harder than ever while somehow feeling further behind than when they started. That is not a contradiction. It is exactly what you would expect from a system where the finish line moves forward at the same rate you do. Seneca, in Letters to Lucilius, letter 16, paragraph 8, made the point that poverty is not defined by how little a person holds, but by how much they still reach for, so that a man surrounded by abundance can remain genuinely poor as long as his wanting outpaces what he has. So the question isn't what to buy next. The question is, what happens the day you finally notice the treadmill and realize you've been calling it progress? It is also worth asking who benefits from you never noticing it. Almost every signal in modern life, advertising, status displays, algorithmic feeds built to hold your attention, is quietly optimized to keep the treadmill running, because a satisfied person is a poor customer for almost anything being sold. None of that is a conspiracy aimed at you personally. It is simply an economy built in large part on top of exactly the mechanism this video is describing. Knowing this does not make the pull disappear. It simply gives you the option. The next time something glows just out of reach, to ask whether the glow belongs to the object, or to the machinery quietly profiting from your noticing it at all. Fear disguised as ambition. Ask someone chasing a bigger number why they want it, and they'll tell you about freedom, security, options. Push slightly harder, and a different word usually surfaces: afraid. Afraid of being one bad year from collapse. Afraid of needing help and not being able to ask for it without shame. Afraid of becoming the version of themselves they grew up watching struggle. This matters because fear and ambition produce almost identical behavior: long hours, constant saving, relentless acquisition, but they are not the same engine, and they do not respond to the same fuel. Ambition can be satisfied. You build the thing, you reach the milestone, the drive can rest. Fear cannot be satisfied by accumulation, because fear isn't a deficit of resources. It's a prediction about danger, and no amount of money silences a prediction running in the nervous system rather than the bank account. This is why people with more than enough to survive several lifetimes still check their balance with a knot in their stomach. They are not solving a math problem. They are trying to out-earn an old fear that was installed long before they had any money to manage at all. Watch how the fear adapts every time you try to outrun it. Hit the savings target, and the fear simply relocates to a new threat: a recession, a health scare, a dependent who might one day need more than you have. The fear was never actually about the specific danger it names. It is a fixed amount of dread, looking for wherever your attention currently is. This is precisely why financial education alone rarely cures it. You can master every spreadsheet, every investment strategy, every risk model available, and still lie awake at night, because the dread was never a knowledge problem in the first place. It was always a nervous system problem wearing a financial disguise. This is also why people who grew up in genuine scarcity often struggle the most to feel safe later, regardless of how much they've earned. The body learned a lesson about danger long before the mind learned anything about money, and bodies are notoriously slow to update, no matter what the bank statement says. Epictetus, in Discourses, Book 1, Chapter 1, taught that the fundamental skill in life is separating what actually falls under our control from what does not, and that nearly all human distress traces back to treating the second category as though it belonged in the first. Fear of scarcity is almost always an old story misfiled as a current financial fact. The danger of this misfiling is that it makes the fear feel urgent and current, when most of what it is protecting against already happened long ago to a much younger and far less capable version of you, one who genuinely had no resources, no skills, and no options at all. So before you add another zero to the target, there's a harder question waiting. What exactly are you trying to outrun, and has it ever once been about the money? The identity you're funding. Somewhere along the way, a quiet equation formed in your mind without your permission. Net worth equals self-worth. Nobody states it that bluntly. It hides in smaller sentences. I need to prove I made it. I don't want to be seen as someone who struggles. I want them to know I succeeded. Listen closely to those sentences. They're not about money. They're about being seen as enough as a person, using money as the evidence. This is the most expensive substitution a mind can make, because it turns a financial goal into an identity project, and identity projects have no finish line. You cannot out-earn a wound about your own worth. Every dollar becomes Exhibit A in a trial that never reaches a verdict. Here's how you can test whether this applies to you. Imagine reaching your number in complete privacy. No one ever finding out. No visible change to your lifestyle. No one impressed. If a part of you feels that version is somehow incomplete, less satisfying, almost not worth it, you've found the equation running underneath your ambition. It is worth asking where that equation was first written. Most people can trace it back to a specific season, a comment overheard, a comparison made too early and never corrected, a moment when money became proof of something it was never built to prove. The equation rarely announces itself. It simply runs quietly in the background of every financial decision made since. It is worth noticing, too, how rarely anyone in that original moment intended to install something so heavy. A parent's offhand remark, a classmate's careless comparison, A single afternoon of shame. None of it was designed as a life sentence. It simply landed at an age when nothing was yet equipped to question it. And once you see the equation clearly, a strange thing happens. The number stops feeling like a goal and starts feeling like a verdict that is perpetually being appealed, with you in the role of both the defendant and the judge, and no jury that will ever be satisfied enough to end the trial. Marcus Aurelius, who held more power and wealth than almost anyone alive in his era, observed in Meditations, Book 6, paragraph 16, that acting well is complete in itself, carrying its own value without needing anyone to witness or applaud it. He understood something most people discover too late. If your worth depends on what your wealth proves to others, you have built your sense of self on something that can only ever be borrowed, never owned. There is a quiet kind of grief available here, if you let yourself feel it. Years spent funding a verdict that was never going to be delivered, against a jury that was never actually convened, while the one trial that mattered, the one you were having with yourself, sat completely unaddressed the entire time. And what gets funded by a wound never actually heals. It just gets a bigger number to manage. What Seneca knew about rich men who felt poor. In ancient Rome, Seneca corresponded with men who had more wealth than entire provinces. And he noticed something that should unsettle anyone optimizing their finances today. The richest men he knew were frequently the most anxious about money. Not despite their wealth, because of how they had come to relate to it. He observed that wealth, handled without inner discipline, doesn't calm the appetite, it trains it. Each acquisition raises the baseline of what now feels normal, and anything below the new baseline starts registering as lack, even if it would have looked like extraordinary abundance a decade earlier. This is why Seneca, in Letters to Lucilius, Letter 17, paragraph 12, drew a line between wanting calibrated to what nature actually requires and wanting that runs past it. The first kind never experiences real poverty, while the second is hunted by a sense of lack no fortune can outrun, even in the middle of enormous riches. Read that twice. He is not describing the poor. He is describing the wealthy, men with granaries, estates, and households of servants, who experience the felt sensation of poverty, daily, because their internal measuring stick had no ceiling. This is the part modern advice almost never says out loud. Earning more does not automatically produce a feeling of sufficiency. It can just as easily train a more expensive, more sophisticated version of the same scarcity you started with, dressed in better clothing. This is also why so much modern advice about money quietly fails. It assumes the problem is a lack of resources and prescribes more resources as the cure, without ever asking whether the actual disease is in the relationship to resources, not the quantity of them. Seneca diagnosed this almost 2,000 years before anyone had a word like financial wellness. He simply called it a sickness of the soul and noted that no physician of the body could cure it, because the symptoms presented as a financial problem while the actual infection sat somewhere else entirely. Seneca was not writing from theory. He had watched senators with fortunes vast enough to fund armies grow visibly more anxious with every new estate they acquired, as if the anxiety itself were somehow part of the purchase, included quietly in every transaction they made. Seneca wasn't warning his friends to stay poor. He was warning them that wealth without an internal standard becomes a machine for manufacturing new forms of want, faster than any income could ever satisfy them. So if a Roman senator with a fortune could feel destitute, the real question is not how much you'll need to finally feel secure. It's what standard you're currently measuring against, and whether it has a ceiling at all. There is a reason this lesson keeps surfacing across 2,000 years of letters, empires, and now, a video on a screen in your hand. The mechanism has not changed because the species has not changed. Only the size of the numbers involved has gotten larger, which makes the lesson easier to ignore, not less true. It is almost comforting, in a strange way, to know the senator felt this too, behind walls of marble, surrounded by more than most of us will ever see. It means the discomfort was never proof that you were doing something wrong. It was simply proof that you were doing what nearly every human being does, without the internal standard that actually prevents it: wanting versus needing. Epictetus drew a line that most people never learn to draw. The difference between what you need and what you merely want and the disturbance that comes from treating the second as the first. Needs are finite. Food, shelter, basic security, these have edges. You can meet them, and once met, the disturbance around them genuinely subsides. Wants, left unexamined, have no edges at all. A want can always be intensified by a sharper version of itself appearing nearby. This is precisely why need-based goals feel achievable and want-based goals feel endless. They are different categories of target even when they're expressed using the same currency. Here's where this gets uncomfortable. Most people who describe themselves as financially driven are, if they're honest, no longer pursuing needs. They met those years ago. What they're chasing now is an escalating want, dressed in the language of security, responsibility, or ambition, because admitting I want more for no finite reason feels uncomfortable to say out loud. There is nothing shameful in wanting more. The distortion only begins the moment a want gets relabeled as a need, because that relabeling is what gives the want the emotional urgency of survival, when nothing about it is actually a survival matter at all. Once a want borrows the urgency of a need, it becomes almost impossible to question, because questioning it now feels falsely like questioning your own safety. That is the entire trick. Not the want itself, but the disguise it wears once it crosses that particular line. Epictetus, in Discourses, Book 3, Chapter 22, taught that freedom is not reaching a state where everything you desire is in your possession, but reaching a state where you no longer hang your peace on things that were never yours to command, and the size of your future bank account has never been fully yours to control. This doesn't mean wanting more is wrong. It means wanting more will never function like a need, no matter how urgently it feels like one. It will not resolve the way a met need resolves. It will simply relocate. This single distinction, properly understood, would change how most people in this niche relate to their own ambition. Not by reducing it, but by removing the false promise attached to it, the belief that this particular want, unlike all the others, will finally be the one that actually settles. So here's the test that actually matters. Of everything you're currently working toward, how much of it is a need you haven't met, and how much is a want you've been mistaking for one? Why scarcity survives abundance. Here's something that should not be possible and yet happens constantly. A person with more money than they will ever need still feels, physically in their chest, the exact sensation of not having enough. If scarcity were purely about resources, this couldn't occur. Resources are abundant. The feeling should have updated by now. It hasn't because scarcity was never installed as a measurement of your bank account. It was installed as a script, often early, often around a specific memory, a parent counting coins at a kitchen table, a moment of public embarrassment over money, a year where everything felt unstable. That script doesn't expire when your circumstances change. It runs on its own schedule, triggered by old cues, regardless of what the present moment actually contains. This is why some people, the moment they have a financial cushion for the first time, feel more anxious, not less. Because abundance, paradoxically, can activate the old fear of losing what's finally accumulated, rather than soothing it. The script does not care that the math has changed. It was written by an experience, not by a spreadsheet. And experiences do not update simply because the numbers around them eventually did. You can usually find the original moment if you look closely enough. Not because remembering it fixes anything by itself, but because naming where a feeling came from is the first thing that makes it possible to stop treating it as current evidence about your life right now. A surprising number of people discover, once they finally trace the script back, that it has almost nothing to do with the actual sum currently in question. It was written for a much smaller number, a much younger version of them, in a moment that has nothing left to do with their life today, except that it never received the update. This is part of why the feeling can persist even after years of objective success. The script is not running a current audit of your finances. It is replaying an old recording on loop, triggered by cues that have far more to do with that original moment than with anything currently true about your bank account. Marcus Aurelius observed, in Meditations, Book 9, Paragraph 6, that the conditions for a settled, calm life ask very little from the world outside, and that most of what disturbs a person originates in their own interpretation of events rather than in the events themselves. Notice what he is pointing at. The disturbance is in the opinion, not the circumstance. Your bank balance is a circumstance. Your felt sense of "I don't have enough" is an opinion, one that was formed long ago under conditions that may no longer exist, and one that continues running purely out of habit. Habits, unlike facts, do not require ongoing evidence to keep operating. They simply require repetition. And most people repeat this particular feeling thousands of times before ever stopping to ask whether the original conditions that justified it are even still present in their life. Which means the real audit you need isn't of your finances. It's of a script you've never once stopped to question, no matter how convincing it has felt for years. The Stoic Audit. If the feeling of enough was never going to come from your bank account, there is only one place left to look, and the Stoics were specific about exactly where that is. Epictetus built his entire philosophy on a single starting distinction. Certain things answer to us, and certain things never will. Money, how much you earn, how markets move, how others perceive your success, sits almost entirely in the second category. It can be influenced, but never fully owned, never fully guaranteed. What sits fully within your control is far smaller and far more powerful than most people realize. Your judgments, the meaning you assign to a number, the story you tell about what it proves, the comparison you choose to run or refuse to run in any given moment. This is uncomfortable because it removes the easiest excuse available that you'll feel at peace once external conditions finally align. The Stoic Audit insists those conditions were never the actual location of your peace to begin with. Most people resist this idea the first time they hear it because it sounds like it is asking them to settle, to stop striving, to pretend a real shortfall is fine when it isn't. It is asking nothing of the sort. It is simply separating the math, which deserves your full effort, from the meaning, which deserves your full scrutiny. It is worth being precise about what this audit is not. It is not positive thinking, and it is not pretending a real problem does not exist. It is the much narrower discipline of refusing to let an accurate financial fact get inflated by an inaccurate emotional story riding on top of it. Try this audit honestly, right now. Of everything currently disturbing you about money, the gap, the comparison, the fear, separate what is a fact from what is a judgment about that fact. The fact is usually small. The judgment is almost always doing all the damage. Marcus Aurelius, in Meditations, Book 8, paragraph 47, observed that when something outside you causes pain, the hurt does not actually come from the thing, but from the value judgment you have placed on it, and that judgment is something you retain the power to revise or withdraw at any moment. This is not a comforting platitude. It's a precise diagnostic tool, and once you start using it, you cannot fully unsee what it reveals about where your discomfort has actually been coming from this whole time. It also explains something that confuses people who finally do get what they were chasing. They expected the relief to feel like an event, a single decisive moment of arrival. Instead, when the audit actually works, it feels more like a tax that simply stops being collected, quiet, undramatic, and easy to miss if you are not paying attention to its absence. This is also why the audit has to be repeated, not performed once and filed away. The judgments that created the disturbance did not arrive in a single sitting, and they rarely leave in one either. Each fresh disturbance is simply another invitation to run the same separation again, fact from story, circumstance from opinion. Enough is not a number. It's a judgment. Say the word enough out loud right now in relation to your own finances, and notice what happens in your body before your mind produces a single number. For most people, there's a flinch before there's a figure, a tightening, a reflexive sense of not yet, arriving faster than any actual calculation could justify. That flinch is the real subject of this entire video, not the number that follows it. Epictetus, in Discourses, Book 2, Chapter 2, paragraph 26, taught that people are unsettled not by the situations they face, but by the interpretations they bring to them, which is why one identical circumstance can leave one person at peace and another in torment. The entire difference resting in the judgment each one applies. This means two people could hold the exact same net worth, and one would describe themselves as wealthy beyond their dreams, while the other would describe themselves as falling behind. The bank statements would be identical. The judgment would not be. If that's true, then enough was never a finish line sitting somewhere out in your financial future, waiting to be reached. It is a decision available to you, in principle, at any number, including the one you currently hold. This is not a call to stop earning, stop building, stop wanting growth. It's a correction of where you've been told the relief lives. It does not live 12 months from now, at a slightly higher figure. It lives in a judgment you have the standing to revise today, the moment you choose to revise it. None of this requires pretending your circumstances are perfect or performing gratitude you don't feel. It requires something quieter, noticing that the discomfort you've been calling a financial problem has, this entire time, been a judgment wearing a financial costume. And once that costume comes off, even briefly, it becomes very difficult to fully believe the next number will succeed where this one didn't. That suspicion, uncomfortable as it is, may be the most useful thing this entire video gives you. Most people never test this because some part of them suspects that if they declared enough too early, ambition itself would collapse. But Marcus Aurelius ran an empire while practicing exactly this discipline. The two were never actually in conflict, except in the story you've been telling yourself. It might be worth asking what, specifically, you imagine would happen the moment you actually declared enough out loud, today, at your current number. Most people, pressed to answer honestly, discover the fear is vague, almost cartoonish, a kind of collapse that has never once been observed in anyone who has actually tried it, in any era, in any letter, in any life examined closely enough to check, the life that doesn't wait for the number. Go back to that man staring at his phone at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, looking at the number that was supposed to change everything. He has a choice in this exact moment that has nothing to do with his bank account. He can pick a new number, larger, and resume the chase he's run his entire adult life. Or he can do something far harder. Sit with the number he already has, and ask whether the discomfort in his chest is actually about money, or about a judgment he has never once stopped to examine. Everything in this video has pointed at the same uncomfortable conclusion. The moving target, the borrowed comparisons, the treadmill of acquisition, the fear-wearing ambition's clothes, the identity funded by an old wound, the scarcity script that survives abundance, none of it was ever going to be solved by a bigger number. All of it lives in the place Epictetus pointed to from the very beginning. Judgment, not circumstance. This doesn't mean stop building wealth. It means stop outsourcing your peace to a future version of your bank account that, history shows, was never actually going to deliver it. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire and still practiced this daily. Seneca counted his net worth in provinces and still wrote letters warning against exactly the trap most people fall into. They were not poor men theorizing about contentment. They were among the wealthiest men of their era, and they still had to fight this battle every single day against their own minds. If they needed the discipline, so do you, regardless of what your account shows tonight or what it will show a year from now. It is worth saying plainly, this is not a small discipline, and it does not become easy simply because you now understand it intellectually. Understanding it is the first step. Practicing it daily, especially on the days your bank balance gives you every excuse not to, is the part that actually changes anything. This is the part most people skip past on their way to the next goal. The discipline is not a one-time decision you make and then carry with you automatically. It is a practice repeated daily, the same way the wealthiest Stoics repeated it daily, because the mind that produces the feeling of lack does not stay corrected for long without attention. None of this asks you to stop building. It asks you to stop financing the building with a peace you keep postponing, as if peace were a reward that arrives only after the work is finished, when the work, for most people watching this, is never actually finished at all. There will likely never be a day when every financial uncertainty in your life is fully resolved. That was never the actual condition for peace, no matter how convincingly it has felt like one. The condition was always the judgment, available to revise at any number on any day, including this one, including right now, while the video is still playing. Here's what nobody tells you about people who finally make peace with enough while they're still building. They don't stop being driven. They simply stop bleeding for every gap between where they are and where they think they should be. And there's a colder version of this same lesson, one this video hasn't touched yet, about what happens to the people closest to you while you keep waiting for a number that was never going to arrive.